All right, can I start now? Uh, Thank you, Dave, for the music. We acknowledge the Tutelo Monacan people who are the traditional custodians of the land on which we work and live, and recognize their continuing connection to the land, water, and air that Virginia Tech consumes. We pay respect to the Tutelo Monacan nations and to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Welcome everyone to our webinar, 1 Year of COVID-19, How Women Across the World Are Coping, Managing and Resisting COVID-19. Namaste, मेरा नाम Dr. Sweta Bania ho. Namaste, my name is Dr. Sweta Bania and I'm an assistant professor of rhetoric, professional and technical writing at Virginia Tech University. As the chair and organizer of this program, thank you everyone for joining us today from multiple time zones and countries across the globe. If you have any technical difficulties, please contact Dave Xu and Su-Ching Wang, whose contact information are on the emails we sent out earlier today. Please feel free to drop questions anytime by using Q&A feature. We'll ask the questions at the end to our speakers. This event will be recorded, and for accessibility purposes, we have closed captions available. If you are live tweeting this event, please use our hashtag COVIDSheroes. Let's take a moment of pause to remember the lives of hundreds of thousands of people around the globe whom we have lost due to this virus, millions of whom who are fighting against this virus, and all the first responders as well as immigrant first responders who haven't stopped since the pandemic began last December. Let's not forget those who have lost their lives to police brutality, caste-based discrimination, and gender-based violence. Navraz Bike, Samjana Bike, Nirmala Pantha in Nepal, Rosimar Rodriguez, Michelle Ramos Vagras from Puerto Rico, Uwavera Omozua, and Tina Ezekwe in Nigeria, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Rashad Brooks in the US. This month marks a year of COVID-19 pandemic, which has challenged human civilization and our lives in a way we have never seen before. Like any other disasters in this global pandemic, the role of women in crisis response has been ignored. Hence, we see interviews feature stories and news of many male narratives, and those most of whom are heroic. Hence, breaking the stereotypical male heroic narrative, this transdisciplinary feminist collaborative panel features scholars and practitioners from Puerto Rico, Nepal, and Nigeria, representing the Americas, Asia, and Africa. The speakers will present on their feminist research and praxis of the community work during disasters, including the global pandemic. We dedicate today's webinar to all the sheroes who are continually coping, resisting, and managing the consequences of COVID-19. I'd like to take a moment to thank the College of Liberal Arts and Human Sciences at Virginia Tech for providing me with International Initiative small grants to organize this global transdisciplinary feminist event. Likewise, I would like to acknowledge the Dean of our college, Dr. Laura Belmonte, and her continuous push towards transdisciplinary research, teaching, and practice, which has helped me envision this program. And without Associate Dean Dr. Farida Jalaljai's Global Engagement Initiative and support by the chair of my department, Dr. Rebecca Weaver Hightower, this event wouldn't be possible. It is my honor today to present three outstanding panelists whose research, teaching, and practice has inspired me. Dr. Risa Chansky, professor in the Department of English at University of Puerto Rico at Mayagüez. Dr. Niti Ariel Khanal, lecturer in the Department of Sociology at Tribhuvan University in Nepal. Ms. Toshin Akibu, program manager, United Nations Women, Nigeria. Lastly, I would like to introduce the respondent of the panel, my mentor and colleague, and an amazing scholar, Dr. Sheila Carter Todd, Associate Professor at the Department of English, Virginia Tech. Now, without delay, I'd like to welcome Dr. Risa Jansky to give her presentation on decolonial eating, food sovereignty in the times of disaster. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Sweta, both for that very nice introduction and for arranging this panel. I am also grateful to Virginia Tech for hosting us today, and I'm very grateful to be on such a panel with such esteemed colleagues. Thank you very much. I hope you'll bear with me as I navigate technology and do somewhat different things here and there than I am used to. And I hope you'll also bear with me. This is an emotional presentation for me, as it is every time I talk about women in disaster. And I hope you'll grant me your patience as I talk about some difficult issues. On my presentation today, I want to talk about decolonial eating. I want to talk about, first, what are some of the colonial contexts of Puerto Rico that are both historic and contemporary, and how do they impact food and eating in Puerto Rico, especially in terms of food insecurity. And the idea of food insecurity is when we have groups of people who cannot access the nutritional and quality food that they need to survive. I want to focus in on what happened during Hurricane Maria, when Hurricane Maria struck in September of 2017. What did it reveal in the sense of some of the failures of food security that we have in Puerto Rico? And I want to highlight what are some of the community-based groups that either sprang up or adapted themselves to new needs. And I will focus on women-led community-based projects, of which there are many. I want to talk about how have these community-based projects that sprang up in the aftermath of the hurricane adapted themselves, changed themselves, and grown for the new needs of the time of COVID-19. What does this mean both for Puerto Rico and for other areas in terms of how we can think about facing food insecurity in areas that are impacted by disaster? And then finally, I'll finish up with a thought about how we can think through others as an act of feminist rhetorics. And so I'm moving towards Sweta's very important question about the year of COVID-19 by foregrounding it in the layers of colonialism and disaster that Puerto Rico has been facing over the years. Puerto Rico is a twice colonized space, and we can look first at Spanish colonization of Puerto Rico and the Americas. Christopher Columbus landed in Puerto Rico in 1493 on the second of his journeys. These were spaces that were already inhabited. They were inhabited by Taino and Arawak indigenous peoples. Christopher Columbus writes throughout his journals that he met people who were the kindest, most gentle, most docile people, and he wrote that they would be perfect for servitude and enslavement. Around 1500, we don't have an exact date for that, but around 1500, King Ferdinand wrote a letter to the Taino and the Arawak indigenous peoples stating that he now owned all of their lands and they were now automatically Christian. Their life's job was now in servitude to the crown. And he ended that letter by saying, if you do not agree with this, we, the crown, will kill you. And so this is the framework in which contemporary histories of the Caribbean, sorry, that was my cat jumping up to get a better view of our meeting today. And so this is the context. And within approximately 2 decades, the indigenous population was decimated and King Ferdinand legalized the transatlantic slave trade in Puerto Rico and legalized the owning of other humans, predominantly for the support of plantation culture and a sugar economy. And I'm compressing here out of necessity, so please bear in mind that this is a compressed version of Puerto Rican history. In the 1780s, the new nation of the United States started to think about building a navy and needed a naval stronghold. And so the United States turned its attention to the Caribbean and tries to purchase or to annex a space in the Caribbean for the Navy. However, the United States is also looking at the thriving sugar economy and plantation culture and wanting to somehow control that wealth that's based in agriculture. In 1898, the United States wins the Spanish-American War and annexes Puerto Rico as part of that. In 1917, the Jones Act is signed and Puerto Ricans become US citizens. However, they become non-voting US citizens who do not have voting representation in the United States Congress. This date coincides, however, with World War I, and 236,000 Puerto Ricans registered to be drafted in World War I. I want to skip ahead again and again. I'm sorry for compressing so many things, but I want you to have a context of where we are today. In 2006, incentives that had been in place to bring industry to Puerto Rico were ended, and a great deal of industry left Puerto Rico. In response to this, the Puerto Rican government created a body known as COFINA that started generating a number of bonds, which was borrowing funds that were unable to be paid back in order to meet that loss of revenue. Luis Fortuño in 2009 signs Law 7 that is meant to curb government spending, but what it does is it cuts social welfare programs for women and children, laying a foundation for the humanitarian crisis that we are in today. By 2014, Governor Garcia Padilla declares that the debt from these bonds is unpayable. May 2017, President Obama signs PROMESA into law. It allows Puerto Rico to file for bankruptcy, but it also allows this externally appointed fiscally governing board to control what is spent, and this board enacts severe austerity measures. This is where we are in May of 2017. And I want us to think a little bit here about what does this mean in terms of food and eating. Agriculture and food production are tied into colonization from the moment that the Spanish crown asserts dominance in the Caribbean. Racial and ethnic injustice in Puerto Rico, indigenous, Afro-diasporic, and Latinx are linked to food insecurity over hundreds of years. Capitalism and food security are not compatible, as programs designed to distribute food to vulnerable communities are often the first to be cut from a budget that has to be balanced. Colonialism impacts all aspects of food production and distribution. And so this is where we are in September of 2017, when Hurricane Maria batters Puerto Rico. And we have a strange meteorological phenomenon that happens in that Hurricane Jose comes to the area before Hurricane Maria, and Hurricane Jose passes by but is stalled off the mid-Atlantic region of the United States because of a low pressure system. So every time Maria tries to leave, she meets this low pressure system from Jose and comes back. And so we have approximately 30 hours of this hurricane stalled over Puerto Rico. And the other thing is that Hurricane Maria arrives literally 2 weeks after Hurricane Irma. So Hurricane Irma hit predominantly the eastern side of Puerto Rico, but also damages Florida quite heavily. And so in response to Hurricane Maria on the campus of the University of Puerto Rico at Mayaguez, I began a project called Mi Maria, Puerto Rico After the Hurricane. This is a classroom-based project, and a colleague and myself trained approximately 100 undergraduate students in the ethical collection, transcription, translation, editing and dissemination of oral histories of disaster. And this is what has kind of started my interest in disaster studies, to think about how I can serve the needs of students who are survivors in the classroom by helping them become agental in their home communities and take action with a way to address what has happened. I designed a 2-semester course, one that collected oral histories and then one that responded to the issues present in those oral histories. We now have a body of approximately 150 oral histories. And when I sat down to read them as a grouping, I saw that the polyvocal narrative of Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico was a narrative of community responses to disaster, especially when governmental systems that are put in place to help people post-disaster failed or did not succeed to the level as expected. This is a heroic body of text, to say the least. Within that community response to disaster, we're seeing that there are 4 main areas that people are talking about again and again in their oral histories. They're talking about the lack of access to potable water, to clean drinking water, the lack of access to food, and that's both agriculture, the farms that were destroyed in the hurricane. That's both imported food. Over 80% of the food consumed in Puerto Rico is imported. It is imported through ports in Florida that were impacted by Hurricane Irma 2 weeks before Hurricane Maria. And then we're looking also at communal kitchens, the rise of mutual aid communal kitchens after the hurricane. We also saw extreme concerns about homelessness, and we're breaking homelessness down into 2 areas. Houselessness, I lost my house, but then also homelessness in the sense of how do we define the nation as house, and what happens when the systems that the nation or the government have in place to help us after disaster fail, and we can't see how we belong to that community group. And so what are we doing now? We're currently thinking through this idea that the aftermath of this detrimental hurricane is very similar to some of the needs that are happening during this time of COVID-19. And we're trying to understand how the 2 are connected and how they inform each other. And I just want to share with you a quote that one of our narrators shared with us, and this is Vivian Miranda Rodriguez, who on October 9th began delivering food to communities in Añasco and Mayagüez that were flooded by the Rio Grande and the storm surge from the ocean. She says, "I'll never forget one woman who was home with her 2 children. The neighborhood where this woman lived was between 2 bodies of water, the Bay of Mayagüez and the mouth of the Rio Grande. Everybody was flooded there, and it was still full of water. We were outside of the house at the front gate. Both my boys were standing beside me. The woman was about my height. She had dark brown hair, almond eyes, light almond skin. She looked a lot like me. I asked, 'Have you had lunch?' The woman said, 'No, but we were about to eat some pagao.' Pagao is the crispy, almost burnt rice at the bottom of the pot. We gave her sandwiches and she started to cry. She couldn't stop hugging me, and my boys started crying too, because it was a human moment, mother to mother, and her kids were just so happy because they were going to eat." Vivian's narrative continues, and she says, "The majority of the people I spoke with hadn't seen any official help, not FEMA, not the municipality, not the military." And FEMA is the Federal Emergency Management Agency in the United States. And so Vivian is one example of multiple stories that we recorded in which lack of food and lack of access to food played a dominant role in the narrative. And she is one of many people who were community members who were not affiliated with an aid organization who stood up and said, what can I do to feed others? And this is the space that becomes extremely interesting to me. So after Hurricane Maria, 80% of the food in Puerto Rico that is imported through ports in Florida could not arrive and could not arrive for months. The majority of farms in Puerto Rico were destroyed, and the systems to distribute the food failed. They failed because of closed roads. They failed because of lack of gasoline for trucks and other vehicles to carry the food. They failed because people's homes and stores in which neighborhoods would turn to receive food and goods were destroyed. And the picture that I'm showing you here is a warehouse that I and my team of students uncovered in Arecibo, which is on the northern coast of Puerto Rico. We uncovered this warehouse in March of 2019. It is a former grocery store that is piled high with relief supplies for the hurricane, for victims of the hurricane. And these materials were sent in October of 2017. So they remain undistributed. There were 2 MASH units, mobile hospital units. There were 4 community-sized water filtration centers, along with the boxes upon boxes of food, medical supplies, feminine hygiene products that you can see here. And this is not the only warehouse that has been found. And so I'm sharing with you a list of some of the women-led community-based organizations that either began after the hurricane or adapted the work that they were doing for the specific needs of the hurricane. Brigada Solidaria del Oeste, Casa Pueblo, Fundación Casa Cortez, Fundación de Culebra, El Departamento de la Comida, El Local Santurce, and Come Colegial. Come Colegial is the one that I want to focus on as an example. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what Come Colegial did after the hurricane, but and what they are doing during the time of COVID. But I'm using it as a single example of the way in which women are leading community-based groups to feed others in times of disaster and great insecurity. The woman in the middle of this photograph is an amazingly special woman. Her name is Lucy Serrano Gaston. I am privileged and proud to call her a friend. Lucy Serrano, in 2014, we found at our university that a group of students were sleeping in one of the buildings. And when we went to talk to this large group of students and ask, hey, why are you sleeping in the bio building? The answer was, we don't have enough money to attend school and pay rent, and school is more important. And so Lucy Serrano, in response to Ley 7, which cut social welfare programs, and to this realization that we had students who could not afford to house themselves and feed themselves, began a very small organization, Come Colegial. And Come Colegial began as our university food bank. In 2017, before the hurricane hit, this program was serving approximately 150 students. After the hurricane, Lucy opened the sign up to anyone who is in need, and at 1,125 students, she had to close the list because we simply could not feed all of those people. Since that time, Lucy has partnered with numerous other food banks. She has received grants. She has been able to buy refrigerators, and starting on December 28, 2019, we began an earthquake swarm. And what that means is that off the southwestern coast of Puerto Rico, thousands of earthquakes have happened over the last approximate 1 year. What that means is that we have people who are out of their homes and unable to shelter in place. We have people who are unable to wash their hands in the time of COVID because they do not have a home to go to with running water. Kome Colegial adapted to serve the needs of those people. And then in March of 2020, the university shut down its campus operations because of COVID-19. Lucy again adapted the program to have touchless delivery service. Her motto is everyone eats. I want to give you a little bit of the context of what's happening during COVID-19. Our governor closed the public schools in-person service. That is a problem because the majority of our children receive food at school, and that program was shut down as well. International students who were studying in Puerto Rico were under the laws of the United States, which I don't know if you heard or not, but initially this presidential administration said we are not going to support international students when the campus is closed. So we had those students to deal with. The earthquake swarm is still active, and our economic depression and austerity measures are still in place. Here is a brief overview of what we're looking at for Kome Colegial as adapted to the needs of COVID. You can see that the leader, Lucy, is there with student volunteers, and they are masked up. You can see that they're organizing non-perishable products for distribution. They're driving the bags of non-perishable goods where they can, handing them off. And you can see the other thing is there's a poster there for a free market where you can drive up and get a free bag of food, no questions asked. Lucy Serrano, this is a quote from Lucy, and Lucy is saying, thanks to the efforts of companies, associations, teachers, community entities, anonymous people, among many more, we have delivered 14,408 dishes of food and counting. We always feel grateful for each one of them. Everybody eats. Sorry, there was my technical difficulty. I told you I was going to have one. And so this raises some very important questions that help us to think through this situation. Who eats? Who is able to eat? Who has access to food? What do they eat? When we received care boxes of food from the United States government after Hurricane Maria, I received one and I opened it up, and there was a letter in it that said, "Dear citizens of Houston, your government is with you." And so these were leftover boxes from Hurricane Harvey. And when you looked at the boxes, all of the nutritional food had been removed, and they were filled with Starbursts and Snickers bars. When do you eat? When? How often do you get to eat? How much do you get to eat? What is on your plate? How much does this cost the person who is eating? And how easy is it to access the food? So these are some important questions about food distribution. And I'm very grateful to Sweta for asking the question of what happened this year. And I'd like to say that what happened this year is that we had previously been called to action from disaster upon disaster upon disaster, and hundreds of years of colonial context. And so this year, what happened was in concert with hundreds of years, but also the last few years. And these are some of the things that I have been thinking about. The women of Puerto Rico are feeding as many people as we can while thinking through self-reliant practices for food production and distribution. And I want to make it clear that the women I'm talking about here today are necessary heroes. They are heroes. They have stepped up in unimaginable ways, but they have done so because of an abandonment from the government, an unfair, unjust, and unnecessary abandonment. And that does not change the fact that the people in question are heroes, but they are heroes in the face of absence and failure. And so we are reflecting upon what we have learned about the incompatibilities of colonial practices and equity for all people. How do we unmake hundreds of years of colonialism? Working to articulate how a basic human right to food is interrupted by the systems of colonialist structures that tie eating to income. Grappling with the instability of food production, distribution, and procurement that Hurricane Maria revealed. And it's not that these are necessarily new problems, but the problems have been shown in very dramatic ways. Assessing community-based responses to disaster that were quickly created or adapted in the wake of Hurricane Maria, and developing long-term solutions to widespread hunger and injustice that they represent. We don't want to go back. We've seen a problem, we've seen a failure, and to quote Lucy, no one should go hungry. So how can we move forward, making sure that this does not happen again? Developing mutual aid programs that link community centers and regions. I have been working with a center high in the mountains and a center on an island off the East Coast, and they're doing very similar, wonderful things, and they don't know about each other. They don't know how to share resources. They don't know how to share information. So how can we make sure that people know about each other and can work together and share resources? Adapting our strategies for rural, mountainous, and urban communities, as well as those that do not have stable communication networks or utilities. Many of the groups that we work with want us to create digital components for information circulation, but we do not have stable electricity, we do not have stable internet, we do not have widespread high bandwidth internet. And so we have to think about low tech or no tech ways of sharing information as well as digital components. And then creating flexible approaches for a variety of events, hurricanes, earthquakes, and global pandemics. The last thing that I want to say in my presentation, and I just want to call attention to this idea that the act of feeding can be read as feminist rhetoric. And I'd like to employ Judith Butler's understanding of gender construction here, in which that which is masculine is not necessarily male and that which is feminine is not necessarily female. Rather, binary oppositions and power dynamics come into play here, in that within the colonial model, that which is masculinized is that which is in power, and that which is feminized is that which is disempowered. And so I just want to leave you with the thought that I'm reading the act of widespread feeding as a way of undermining the dominance and power of colonialism. As I've briefly explained in this presentation, when we tie who eats to who has income, we maintain the utmost power over them and their bodies. The women who have risen up in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria, who have kept their momentum going and who are actively resisting the boundaries placed upon them by COVID-19, and I mean that from a governmental perspective, not from a viral perspective, they resist a colonial model that seeks to disempower them. So the act of feeding and the act of nourishing the nation becomes a stand against imposed control by, and in this case, the United States. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jansky. That was wonderful. I have goosebumps all over. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for providing this arena. And I'm trying to stop sharing now. Stop share. There we go.
Okay. Thank you again. Now I would like to invite Dr. Neeti Ariel Kanal for your presentation. And her presentation is titled Caring the Most Vulnerable Stories of Nepali Women COVID-19 Warriors. After you.
Thank you so much, Sweta. I hope everybody is hearing me fine. So I will be starting the screen sharing as well. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Sweta Gyanubania for bringing us all together to share the stories of how women are coping and resisting and negotiating the challenges posed by COVID-19 all over the world. So it's my honor to share the panel with Dr. Visya Chansky and Toshin Aibu. And thank you all the participants for joining with us today. So today I would be talking about, I would be sharing about the COVID-19 warriors from Nepal, stories of Nepali women. So I'll be I hope my screen is visible to you all. So first, I would be talking about sharing a bit of a background and context about Nepal, because the way Nepal has experienced COVID-19 is very much shaped by Nepal's social and cultural and economic context. So I would be elaborating on that. And I would be talking about how COVID-19 has impacted on Nepali women. And I would be sharing stories of 3 COVID-19 zeros. So, because this is an international seminar, I would just like to show where Nepal is, because this is a frequently asked question for many of us Nepalese, where Nepal exactly is. So Nepal is sandwiched in between two Asian giants, India and China. It's a small country. It's a landlocked country in between India and China. And Nepal is also a country of diversity. Nepal is multicultural, multiracial, and multilinguistic, multi-ethnic country. It is home to 125 ethnic and caste groups, and they speak 123 languages. And they also follow at least 10 different religions. And Nepal is also very much geographically diverse. We have like 3 ecological zones that ranges from sea level to the highest peak in the world. Nepal is considered a developing country, and its HDR ranking is 147 out of 189 among all other countries. So, talking about women in Nepal, women in Nepal are considered secondary citizen. This argument I make on the basis of Nepali women do not still have full right to confer their citizenship to their offspring independently. It doesn't mean they cannot do it at all, but provision stipulates that you really have to prove that the father is absent and go through various bureaucratical hurdles in order to do that. And stories of women who have received citizen certificates from those mediums show that it is a very humiliating and disturbing experience. So women in Nepal are secondary citizens, and women in Nepal have actively contributed to different political and social movements in Nepal. Nepal has had a very turbulent history from monarchy, then democracy, to now the Federal Republic. And we also had a 10-year-long armed conflict. So, in all these movements and political movements, women played a very vital and significant role. But despite their significant contribution, when it came to capitalizing and getting the benefit of these movements, when it came to getting the leadership opportunities, women were always sidelined. And experiences of Nepal's experience with conflict shows that women were the most victimized, and also they were the active participants. Like 40% of the Maoist army comprised of women combatants, but despite that, when it came to peace process and post-conflict political and social transition, Nepali women still are, their concerns are not seriously considered. So these are some very simple facts about Nepali women. Just to share that we have had an incredible progress over the year, but it's still If we look at the education, significant discrimination still exists. Political participation has been increasing, but again, it has been very much limited to the token representation and token inclusion. So COVID-19 and Nepal. COVID-19, as we all know, it has posed as a unprecedented challenge in modern times. It's not just a health issue, but it's a social issue. So I am a sociologist, and as a sociologist, I believe that social impacts of COVID-19 has emerged as one of the most profound crises in economy, and it has tested the very strength of our social fabric, our notion of community, our notion of society is all being challenged. And I very much was inspired by Dr. Lori Pick, what she said about the social importance of studying COVID-19 from sociological perspective. She argues that it is during the moment of crisis that we can learn most about the social order, and also think about what's happening right now with the massive inequalities that are emerging in this pandemic and the social economic fault lines that are opening wide. So what she says is very much true to what is happening in Nepal right now. So looking at the world map and available data on coronavirus, we could see that Nepal is gradually emerging as one of the hotspots for COVID-19. But despite increasing numbers, if we compare with the death count seems to be incredibly low. But I argue that for Nepal, it's more than the death happened through COVID-19, directly impacted by the COVID-19. I argue that social impact of the pandemic has actually claimed more lives in a country crippled with inefficient and unaccountable government and weak health system and social inequality based on caste, gender, and regional identities. I argue this because in Nepal, the way um, government has responded to pandemic has claimed more lives. So I would be talking about how that is actually happening. So in Nepal, informal sector employs more than half of the people, and most of the people who are working in informal sector are actually women belonging to marginalized and vulnerable communities, and they have been hit hardest. And along with that, Nepal is a country that is gradually emerging as a remittance-based economy. And recently, after the COVID-19 crisis started building up all over the world, Nepali citizens were forced to return home, and they were caught in a situation where the host country wants them to leave the country, but Nepal government was not yet ready to have them back. So there has been high number of Nepali citizens who are continuing to coming back, and it has created another big crisis for Nepali economy. And not only that, COVID-19 and the government response has actually claimed more lives. Um, um, Mental health responses hasn't been that good. For instance, um, Nepali government introduced the first lockdown. And if we look at the data on the very first 74 days of the lockdown, 1,227 people committed a suicide. And if we compared the rate of the suicide in the earlier year, that was almost double. So COVID-19, I argue that in case of Nepal, it is more than a public health challenge. It has emerged as a serious economic and social crisis. Now, talking about Nepali women, so Nepali government instituted a nationwide lockdown with the message of stay home, arguing that home is where the safety is. But for women in Nepal, Nepal already has a high rate of domestic violence, and home has never been a safe place for women everywhere in the world because of the high rate of the domestic violence. experience. So in case of Nepal, the official data is yet to emerge. There has been small studies which may not be representative of all the sample, but there is a hotline run by the National Women Commission, and according to their records, it shows that a total number of 885 complaints were registered in 24-hour toll-free helpline from April to June 2020. So this number was the twice of the complaint received within the same period before lockdown. So that shows that the level of domestic violence increased exponentially. And it is evident that in like women all over the world, women in Nepal are also coping with emotional and physical care burden, which I would like to call it a fourth shift. We often talk about the third shift, first shift in the morning, then in the afternoon during the work, and then the evening. But there is also something called the fourth shift, where women considered as a carer of the family also take care of the family member while they sleep and making sure that they are comforted. And in times of the COVID-19, when people in the families and also communities are falling sick, it is considered the responsibility of women to take care of those sick and elderly. So these increased burden has also challenged women in Nepal. So on the backdrop of this extremely challenging condition, we see there have been few Nepali women rising above the challenges, and they have embraced the roles of the carers of the most vulnerable people affected by COVID-19. So I have chosen three COVID-19 zeros. By choosing these three women, I'm not saying other women's contribution are less. I'm just choosing them as a representative of the courage and the bravery that all COVID-19 frontline warriors, women in Nepal, that are going through. So these COVID-19 zeros, I also argue, are breaking the stereotype, and they're challenging the established gender norms and also questioning the people in power, including the government, because they are doing exactly where the government is lacking. They are supporting exactly where people are in need. And I argue that stories of these COVID-19 zeros are even more important to acknowledge, to document, and to talk about, to challenge the systematic silencing and devaluation of women's contribution to society. So over the years, if we look at the social movements and history, we see that the women's contributions have always been systematically silenced and hidden. So acknowledging these COVID-19 zeros is an important way for us to acknowledge their contribution. So I'll be talking about three women. With each three women, I would be introducing them, and I would be talking about what exactly they are doing. And then I'll be talking about how their work actually challenges the established gender norms and stereotypes in Nepali society. So first, among three warriors I am talking about is Dr. Runa Jha. She is a chief pathologist and director of National Public Health Laboratory in Nepal. So earlier in the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis in Nepal, there was only one public health lab that was actually authorized to do the COVID-19 testing, because government hasn't had authorized the private labs yet to do the COVID-19. So it was all in her shoulder to lead the team who was doing the testing from the samples all over the Nepal, from different parts of the Nepal. And this laboratory is a public laboratory which was linked with other 277 government laboratories. So, and she was in respect to the contribution and exemplary leadership that she showed during the crisis, she was included in UN Women's 5 Women on the front lines of COVID-19 response. And she is her contribution has also challenged various stereotypes about women working in the medical professions, women working in the science, women working in medical disciplines. Second COVID-19 warrior that I am talking about is Ms. Indira Rana Magar. She is a social worker with exemplary and inspiring history of working in this organization called Prisoner Assistance Nepal. And this organization has been looking after the children from criminal parents living in jail, because in Nepal, there was a situation where if parents are convicted, children had to live together with the parents, because Nepal did not have a alternative welfare system where children could live and again rejoin the parents. So seeing that gap, she actually founded that organization, and over the years she has become mother of 20,000 children who have been deserted by their parents due to challenging circumstances. So during the first lockdown, she was one of the very few people who responded to where it really mattered. And I learned so much from what Dr. Rizia Tansky shared earlier. Food is not just a food, it is uh, um, um, a very important issue, especially during the pandemic. And the food security issue was left unaddressed by the Nepali government when they introduced the nationwide lockdown, and especially people who are poor and vulnerable, who did not have permanent jobs and security of earning living. They were directly impacted, and they were coming out in the streets and having to being forced to scavenging in the garbage. So when she saw that, when Miss Rana Magar saw that, she started feeding poor people. And her initiative initially started with feeding 20 people a day, but now she feeds more than 700 people every day. And she feeds it right in Kathmandu, in the middle. Kathmandu is the capital of the city. She feeds it in the, she feeds people in the middle of the heart of the city. And government response to her initiative was the mayor of the municipality, Kathmandu municipality, said it was embarrassing them that it was giving a wrong message to international community that Nepal have many ports. So government was very much focused on saving the face and saving the grace, not so much focusing on supporting the people. So these are the pictures that I have got from Ms. Rana Magar's Facebook profile, which are public. So she was sharing about her work. So this is how she has been working tirelessly every day, bringing hot meals to the poor people who have been if impacted by COVID-19. And this is the picture of she's cooking. So along now, the another inspiring women I would like to share about is 18-year-old Sapna Rokamagar. So she was also recently, a week ago, was recognized by BBC as one of the 100 influential women of 2020. And Sapna's work currently is she works with the Homeless Management and Rehabilitation Center. So it is a Nepali charity which provides assistance to homeless people. So in addition to that, what they have been doing also, um, they actually help to perform the last funeral rites to the abandoned and unidentified deceased bodies. So during this coronavirus period, there has been unidentified people have died because of COVID-19 as well. And that was a huge crisis of who is going to manage this body, which sometimes family members also hesitated to become involved. So they provided this service to provide a respectful funeral rite according to the Hindu tradition. And Sapna's engagement is also very interesting because in Nepal, traditionally, women do not have rights to do funeral and attend the funeral rites of even of their closest family members, because the way Nepal as a patriarchal society with a high level of son preference. So the reason why sons are so much valued by the parents is because sons are expected to do the funeral rites of their parents with the hope that they will have secure afterlife, because having a good funeral done by the son is the way to ensure that you have a good afterlife. So daughters were never considered as the rightful people to conduct the funeral rites of their parents, not just their parents, of their any family members. So Sapana's engagement in this is breaking a lot of stereotype, because the very presence of Sapna in this morgue shows that she is she is challenging these stereotypes and norms. And last, I would like to conclude that Nepal, Nepal has been traditionally considered a Hindu country. Now it's a secular country. And by using this analogy, I am not trying to do disrespect to other communities and religion in Nepal, but I couldn't help but connect the image of the three trinity that we usually associate with Hinduism. In Hinduism, three gods are considered to be the people who hold the civilization together. Brahma is the creator who creates the life, who creates the earth, and Vishnu, who is in the middle, he sustains and takes care of the people, of the living beings in the world. And then Shiva is the god of the destruction. He is the god of the death. So I argue that these three women, among the many others COVID-19 heroes, have emerged as the new trinity, because the way the COVID-19 frontline warriors have been working, healthcare professionals have been working to take care of COVID-19 patients, shows that they're giving new life to COVID-19 survivors through medical care. And second, people like Indira Rana Magar, by caring and feeding the most vulnerable, are sustaining the people, taking care of the people. And people like Sapna are providing dignified funeral rites to homeless and unidentified. So this is the COVID-19 zeros, stories of the COVID-19 zeros I wanted to share with you all. And there are a lot more stories, so many stories that have showed that women have showed a courage and perseverance and resilience in these trying times. And I would like to acknowledge them all over the world. And again, thanks for listening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Oriel Canal. That was really wonderful, and it really hit home as you all know that I'm from Nepal, and it just made me so emotional. Well, now, without delay, I would like to welcome Ms. Tosina Kubu from UN Women Nigeria for her presentation, Resilience of Nigerian Women in COVID-19.
Thank you very much, and greetings to my co-panelists, Dr. Risha, Dr. Niti, and to Dr. Sweeta and Dr. Sheila for the opportunity to participate in this very, very heartwarming, very insightful engagement. My name is Tosin Akibu, and I'll be speaking about the resilience of Nigerian women as we have seen at the advent of COVID-19. And my outline would, the presentation would focus a bit on the COVID-19 situation in Nigeria, its effects on the women, and the gender gaps that have been further exacerbated by COVID-19. The overview will spotlight the joint EU-UN Spotlight Initiative and then interventions. And then I'd like to talk about a case in point and then conclude that way. In Nigeria, as of today, we have 69,000 and some fraction of confirmed cases. The first case was reported on the 27th of February in 2020, after which a month later, we were sent into a complete total shutdown of the entire country. Nigeria has over 180 million people. And what we saw emerging, what we currently see emerging as COVID-19 effects from the control measures include impacts on the economic and livelihood of everyone, but especially women, and especially those left furthest behind. There has been a loss of income. Emerging data from UNDP has said another shutdown will throw 15 million women into complete abject poverty. The increased social and domestic responsibilities, my co-panelist has mentioned this, the health and well-being, access to healthcare was reduced. There was an increase in maternal and infant mortality, burden on mental health and poor psychosocial support systems, and then human rights. We had increased incidences of domestic violence. A lot of people were literally locked in with the enemy. They couldn't go anywhere, and they in fact, we had instances where women during the lockdown knew that immediately after the lockdown, they were going to get a divorce because what they had been, trying to work on fell into pieces. The gender gaps that we further saw that were widened by COVID-19 was the absence of a central GBV data collection system. It was difficult to find data, absence of gender policies for emergencies such as COVID-19. Authorities were at a loss of how to respond or react in a gender-sensitive manner towards COVID-19. There was an absence of social safety nets for women, especially those in businesses. We also had lack of gender-sensitive emergency health systems. There was the burden of care on women and girls, poor access to water and sanitation. The lockdown generally further broke down already strained intimate relationships, and then we had the humongous issue of a lack of disability-friendly helplines. Now, I'll be talking briefly about the joint EU-UN Spotlight Initiative and the interventions that we adopted to address some of the gaps. What is the Spotlight Initiative? It is the global multi-year partnership between the EU and the United Nations to eliminate all forms of violence. It's the largest global funding, and it responds to all forms of violence. It's an initiative focused on issues and spotlighting issues of women achieving gender equality and women's empowerment. And the interventions are multi-sectoral and multifaceted, and they have 6 reinforcing programming pillars. And I'll be reading a statement by the Deputy UN Secretary General, Amina J. Mohammed. She said, prevention is a central component of our new UN-EU Spotlight Initiative. It's a large-scale global initiative to finally end all violence against women and girls. Now, very quickly, these are the pillars. We have laws and policies. We have institutions, strengthening federal and government institutions, prevention through the promotion of gender equitable social norms. You will agree with me that if we take, for example, the socio-ecological model that takes into cognizance the significant others in the influencing sphere of an individual, then we may be able to aptly understand where the facilitators and the barriers of certain social norms are and the perceptions and the attitudes that perpetrate them. We have services ensuring that high quality services for survivors of violence are available. We have data improving the quality, accuracy, and availability of data on violence against women. And then we have the women's movement, promoting strong and empowered civil society and women's movement. And so my presentation will focus a bit around women's movement today. On the Spotlight Initiative at UN Women, we have women-led civil society grassroots organizations at the center of effort. And at the advent of COVID-19, we had to quickly revise work plans to adapt to COVID-19. It was tasking. A lot of people had to redesign, had to think out of the box on how they could reach the underserved, the underprivileged, and they had to reach women in the communities, especially in the face of a lockdown. And so for laws and policies, what did we do? We realized that, yes, a lot of the states had gender policies, but the gender policies did not speak to how there was going to be a response during an emergency such as COVID. So women's coalitions in the 6 spotlight states worked with the state ministries of women's affairs to develop gender policy briefs that speak to gender-sensitive responses. And then during that, the advent of COVID, we also were able to, through the women's movement, push for the Senate to pass the sexual harassment bill in tertiary institutions. I do not know if some of you saw the October 7, 2019 report, the BBC report of sexual harassment in some Nigerian universities. And before now, there has been no law, no policy around sexual harassment in tertiary institutions. So through the spotlight, we were able to have a collective signature petition in the Senate to be able to move this forward. And then we have the women's movement present at the second reading, the second hearing of the panel. What that did for us was it gave us the leverage to be able to work in tertiary institutions virtually to work with sexual and school-related gender-based violence response teams, set them up and have ambassadors who could support other students at the tertiary institution. And then virtually, we were able to engage over 100 government officials across the 6 states on gender-responsive budgeting, because that came out as a huge gap. There was no gender-responsive budget that could support, for example, provide social safety nets for women during COVID-19. And so we set up this engagement, and we have allies and male champions in all of the ministries, the departments, and agencies, where right now we're currently reviewing the 2020 budget, and we're making sure that it is gender responsive. We're not doing this alone. We're doing it with the allies that we have worked with in the last couple of weeks. And then looking at the prevention and services pillar, women in 10 household clusters formed community surveillance groups. It was a beauty to see where they could come together within a few meters radius of their households. One, they received palliative funding from UN Women through the joint EU-UN Spotlight Initiative. And then, because we were providing second chance education, which includes functional literacy, livelihood, and other support mechanisms for women, we realized that because of social distancing, we couldn't bring all those women together. And so we went online. We used the radio. So we set up radio listening groups and purchased tiny radios that could quite boom the sound. You can see some of them on the table, different colors, beautiful radios where you'd have women in little clusters listen, learn how to read, learn how to write. And I just couldn't share some of the video of women who got married off at 14 and who never could write their names, being able to start reading and writing their names. And so using that functional literacy to support the businesses that they were doing, they didn't need to put money in their husband's account anymore because they didn't know how to read. But they're now able to open bank accounts, write in their name, sign, and have custody of their money. For me, it is very, very heartwarming when women come together to ensure that we have each other's backs. We have seen this. This intensified referral for GBV services. We, in fact, started seeing some women in Putda who would otherwise be quiet, who would otherwise not have access to any form of service, accessing services because of this women community surveillance groups. This activity prevented child marriage. COVID-19 in Nigeria, especially in northern Nigeria, became a breeding time for the perpetration of harmful traditional practices. Families could not get access to livelihood, they didn't have money, and so the next option was to give off their daughter in marriage for exchange of some money or some food item. And so these community surveillance groups put a stop, prevented dozens of attempted child marriage. And then during the COVID-19, in February, I'm just using one example, and it's just an illustrative example, where in February we had, let's say, 11 cases of gender-based violence, consisting predominantly of women. By March, during the lockdown, the cases quadrupled. We had about 364% of people reporting domestic violence. And so we had to quickly open a one-stop center in Sokoto, that's Northwest Nigeria, and it's the first of its kind there. It's sad to say that the first child that was brought was just 3 years old, and she was badly defiled. Between March and today, we've had several hundreds of cases. And on the next slide, I'll be showing you that we had a 15% increase in the number of men and boys reporting incidences of violence perpetrated against them, predominantly cases of sodomy. In the picture is a young woman who is reading her book. She never could read before. And maybe what I'm going to do is add some of the videos to this presentation before I share with Dr. Sweeta, so you can hear. It's so beautiful to hear them saying, I can't believe I'm reading this. I can't believe I'm reading this. I'm so grateful I can read. Thank you for helping me read. I'm sorry. So I mentioned that we had the problem of data collection. Through the joint UN Spotlight, EU-UN Spotlight initiative, we were able to establish the GBV Data Situation Room, and that is the Deputy Secretary General. She launched this a few weeks ago, as well as the Honorable Minister, Federal Ministry of Women Affairs, where we have it's a collation center of all data concerning gender-based violence. The women's movement was able to petition the Presidential Task Force because we had issues at the beginning of the shutdown. People were locked in with their abuser. They would attempt to go out, and the police would tell them it is not an essential request, and they would turn them back. And so over 300 signatures were gotten from women's coalitions, and they petitioned the Presidential Task Force to recognize gender-based violence response as an essential service. And I'm so glad to say this was recognized immediately, and they made a declaration, and that allowed the service providers access, as well as access to homes where they could evacuate women and children. The collective action of these women led to the declaration by the Nigeria Governors Forum on the state of emergency on rape. It's the first time ever. It never happened before in Nigeria, and now state governments are working to ensure that their state is positioned to aptly respond to gender-based violence. We also jointly developed briefers, suggestions for COVID and disability-sensitive response towards COVID-19. Women-led households opened up their homes as temporary shelters where there were no government-supported shelters. Feminist movements set up virtual platforms for assistance, such as WhatsApp groups, toll-free lines, social media groups, and all of that. And then women were trained to make hand sanitizers, face masks. I have two pictures, one picture that shows the sample of the face mask. Women set up hand washing. They established support groups. Women lawyers provided pro bono services. Women in the private sector supported small and medium scale enterprises and provided grants to women. This is my last slide, and I'd like to talk to you about the money-wise practice in Obanliko, local government of Cross River State, Nigeria, in South Nigeria. The practice is one where before a girl child is born, maybe at the age of 2, maybe at 3 months, once she's a girl child, families give her out in marriage with the exchange of tubers of yam, goats, sheep, or material such as the one I'm wearing, or for a paltry sum such as maybe $20 to sustain the family. It could also be in exchange for a debt settlement, that a family member of the girl had incurred. And so you'd see in this community that you have 15-year-old girls with 3 children who are widowed, never gone to school, no education. You can see the house they live in, young girls pregnant, carrying children, babies having babies. And it was so bad that during the COVID-19 situation, more of this was going to happen. But what the women's movement in Cross River did, a coalition of several women, banded up with a group of allies, men in Cross River, in the community, and engaged the traditional system, engaged the religious system, engaged with the community, household to household. And it is with so much pride, with so much relief that I'm sharing with you. There's a link here where the practice has been abolished, and you can imagine the relief of the next girl that was supposed to be given off as a money wife, and the effect of this abolishment on the future and the life of that girl child. I'd like to conclude by reminding us that collective action towards eliminating violence against women works every time, especially in emergencies such as COVID-19, and that we should invest in women-led businesses. The picture on the right is one that we took last week, and for the first time ever again, because of this women's coalition, the Nigerian Governors' Wives Against Gender-Based Violence came together from 25 out of the 36 states to make a declaration and serve the Governors' Forum with a communique demanding for improved response to gender-based violence. These are interesting times. We're seeing shifts that we had never seen before. We need to move beyond income-generating activities to access to markets for young women so that we build a generation of young women who can run businesses, who can be CEOs, who can be entrepreneurs, and would open the door for other women to pass through. Mentoring programs have worked during this period. Intergenerational dialogues has been very useful, where women that attended the Beijing 95 conference are tutoring and mentoring younger women to be able to assess the progress that was made several years after. Leaving no one behind is very crucial, and I'm going to leave you with an actionable step this morning, this afternoon, this evening, wherever you are, dear listeners, that in the fight against gender-based violence, what can you do beyond what the government can do, beyond what institutions can do? Would you leave your home open as shelter for a woman? Would you raise your voice against the battery of a neighbor? Would you speak for the child on the street? Thank you so much for this opportunity, and have a wonderful day. Over to you, Dr. Switter.
Thank you so much. This has been an amazing panel, and I cannot stop my tears. Thank you so much, Tosheen, for sharing these stories and heartwarming presentation. Now I would like to invite Dr. Sheila Carter-Todd, my colleague from the Department of English, for presenting her response to the panel. Welcome, Dr. Carter-Todd.
Okay, I was quite overwhelmed by all that I heard. And so I think, as Dr. Chunsky said, bear with me as I try to speak through this. I try to take notes and capture a lot of what you've said. The joy of having your presentations given to me was that I could actually use some of your words. So I'm going to let you know ahead of time that I will be utilizing a lot of your words. It's really important that we have these conversations, particularly to our understanding of the influence of women. And Virginia Tech talks a lot about beyond boundaries, but this is very, very largely beyond boundaries, particularly in the time of pandemic. I'm just going to briefly recap a few points that you all had made, and then I'm going to close with actually, before we started, we had some time together, and there were some things that were discussed, and so I'm going to close with those comments. Dr. Chunsky helped us to understand a little bit about how feeding as many people as we can while thinking through self-reliant practices for food production was important. I really appreciated the way that she sort of had us reflected on sort of the history of Puerto Rico, but then led us to think about who eats, what do they eat, when do they eat, how much do they eat, and how much does it cost, and how easy is it to access. She talked to us about some wonderful women-led community-based groups working to feed those who are experiencing food insecurity during times of disaster, but also now during the times of pandemic. And then I also like the way that she sort of moved us to think about reading the act of widespread feeding as a feminist rhetoric. The actions of this year within the context of colonialization and disaster, as she said, work to rehumanize those who have been dehumanized through a purposeful positioning as second-class citizens. And I think that was quite effective the way that she said that. Dr. Kanal and Ms. Akipu both presented valuable information on Nepali and Nigerian women's increased burdens and overwhelming resilience during this time of pandemic. In Dr. Kanal's talk, Carrying the Most Vulnerable Stories of Nepali women during COVID, women warriors. She talked to us about how in a backdrop of these extremely challenging conditions, these Nepali women were rising above their space, rising above what they had been, their position in life. She said that these COVID sheroes that she mentioned are breaking the stereotypes and challenging the established gender norms, and are also questioning people in power, including the government. And the contextualization of that helped us to understand how hard something like that is in this particular situation. And then she ended with, and she said there were so many people she could tell us about, but then the concept of redefining the Trinity, I so appreciated that. She argues that these three women, among many others during the COVID sheroes, have emerged as a new Trinity. And she said that they're giving new life to COVID survivors through medical care, caring and feeding the most vulnerable, providing dignified funeral rights to homeless and unidentified. And I was quite overwhelmed by the discussion of how what role that has in the social standing. And then what was really challenging is having to actually speak after Ms. Akupu's talk, because I was frantically trying to bring it all together while holding it together. So, and your discussion about the resilience of Nigerian women and coping and managing and resisting, this whole idea of the collective action towards gender-based violence in terms of thinking about how women came together to change, not only change the situation, but also change the rules and the laws that kept these women in these vulnerable positions, was exceptionally effective. In the way that the women-led households were opening up their homes as temporary shelters, and even at the end challenging us to think about that same concept. The way that feminist movements set up virtual platforms for assistance, the whole idea of the second chance. And I appreciated that you looked at the economic sense of it as well as the educational sense, talking about second chance education, bringing literacy and skills acquisition to women and girls who would not have had access to that. Also the looking at from the legal realm, providing pro bono legal services, and how the women-led private sector was actually bolstering and being supported in a time of challenge, in a particularly difficult time. At the beginning of our conversation, we were sitting in the room trying to check our sound and our video, and Dr. Chomsky had said that what this talk does is this begins an important conversation that is timely because we are in the midst of witnessing it as we are reflecting on it. This is a global communal trauma. We may have a different perspective later, but we may forget. And so these conversations as we're having them now are important to capture as a way of thinking about the narratives of these women's experiences in the moment at the time. I want to thank you so much, Dr. Swetovanya, for letting me be a part of this, for coordinating this conversation and breaking as you said, the historical male-focused narratives by bringing together these scholars to acknowledge international sheroes.
Thank you so much. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me today. I think we have time for some questions. If you want to use Q&A feature to share your questions, again, read it out to our panelists. I think we have one here for Dr. Chansky. It is nice to hear from your presentation. I learned a great deal here. I'm curious to know about the methodology of oral histories that you have used with your students. I'm wondering, how did you start this project and the methods that you used, and how effective you find this method of transcribing history?
Thank you for that question. Shayla mentioned getting a little emotional. So please excuse me, this is a little bit more personal part of the conversation. When we returned to campus just over 1 month after Hurricane Maria destroyed the majority of Puerto Rico, my university distributed a questionnaire regarding students' material needs so that we could attempt to feed and house as many students as possible. Being that I'm interested in autobiography studies, I invited students to write ungraded, not assigned hurricane memoirs. And I did that because I believe that in the midst of disaster, we don't have the opportunity to share our experiences, and that transaction between this is what happened to me and sharing that story with a witness is part of a healing process. And I'm not saying people are healed as in final or absolute, but part of a process of healing. I didn't expect that very many students would do that. Every single student wound up doing it, and I carried home a collection of narratives written with pen or pencil on whatever paper was available, because there was still no electricity and no internet at that time. I read those narratives by candlelight after I had made food for my community on a 1-burner camp stove. And as I read them, they became more and more powerful to me until finally I read a narrative by a young person named Alejandra. And Alejandra told me that after the hurricane, she had watched her neighbors bury 2 family members in their backyard because the hospital was closed and they were still without electricity. And the 2 people needed treatment that was tied to electricity. And since they could not go to the hospital and they could not use the equipment that they needed to use, those family members had died and were buried in the yard. Obviously, I found that to be an extremely moving experience. And I realized that the disempowerment was extremely dangerous, that I had a campus of students who felt powerless both against a natural disaster, and I use my little air quotes there because of fossil fuel greed changing the climate and instigating superstorms, but then helpless in the face of government level failures that lead to electricity being still off months and even a year in some places after a natural disaster, lack of medical care, and the lack of dignity. I think both of my esteemed presenters used the term dignity, and I think that that's a foundation of what we're talking about here. And so that's why I started the project, because storytelling resituates the narrator as a protagonist, as a gentle, as powerful as the storyteller, and oral history additionally helps someone to facilitate the telling of their story, which is a great and powerful gift. And then the dissemination and the sharing of that story rewrites a national narrative or a media narrative that erases people from their own stories. And I have found this to be an extremely, extremely effective model to use. Again, I'm not a counselor, I'm not a therapist, I'm a literature professor, and I feel as though teachers are often people who show up and are there after disaster or tragedy or trauma. We have been there every day for our students throughout COVID. And so adjusting and shaping and changing what we need to teach, what we are mandated, our learning objectives, and adapting that for our situations as we are able to, understanding that we also are partners in communal trauma, is a very, very effective way to recognize and witness our students' experiences and empower them to shape their communities.
Thank you so much. We have another question from Dr. Bonnie Jer from Virginia Tech. Dr. Chansky asked us to think about how can we get away from binary preposition and consider instead how power is masculinized and lack of power is feminized. I wonder if Dr. Kibu and Dr. Khanal could speak about how activists they have observed and worked with would react to stepping away from the binary conception of these problems. Whoever can go first.
So should I answer?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. That's a very interesting question. And yes, I agree that when we talk about power, because we see usually men holding the powerful position, so power has been equated with power has been symbolized as something masculine rather than the feminine. Um, as a feminist researcher, I think we can challenge those conceptions of power by bringing in the values that women represent, values of love, care, and empathy, and vulnerability, as redefining what power means. I haven't. And the presentation today is based on the stories of the women that I shared with. I think they are redefining that notion of power by themselves by feeding the poor, the act of feeding, which is considered a very feminine, but at the same time it also represents the value of what women stands for as the care of the community. So I think challenging that notion of power by our activism and bringing in our feminist values of love, care, and empathy is the way that we can challenge that. Thank you so much for the question. Very interesting.
Toshin, do you want to go ahead? We cannot hear you. I think you have to unmute yourself. Maybe we can go to another question at the moment, since I think there is some technical difficulties. Pauna Shrestha has asked, grateful to hear the unheard narratives of our COVID heroes. I wonder if you all think yourself as COVID heroes. What were your struggle and challenges, and how did you find resurrection?
That was for me as well. Was that? I think, yeah, I think we all are COVID zeros. All of us are COVID zeros, not just me. I think all of the participants who are present here, we all are survivors. We all are coping and resisting in our own way. And my own personal mechanism is through collaboration like this and, talking to feminist researcher like we have here. And we do have a reading group, which Shweta and me are part of. We meet every Sunday. This has been disrupted a bit last few weeks, but we meet every week and then we do discussion and then do informal conversation, just sharing our coping and challenges. So these are the way that I have been trying to cope with the situation. So my answer, we all are COVID zeros, all of us, including you yourself, Bhavanaji.
I think Toshin's microphone is back. I don't think we can hear. It's okay, maybe we can share in chat. Go ahead. as she's typing, I will read it out. And again, thank you so much, everyone. We have around over 100 participants from all around the world, from Italy, Germany, Nepal, India, many parts of the US, and a lot of people around the world. I'm so humbled by your participation. Tosin says that we should take a critical look at hegemonic masculinity and how power dynamics affect the work we do. I think that's a great answer. And I think we are running out of time and we have lost Dr. Risa Chansky, but I would like to thank you all of us for joining me and all in this panel as well as in this webinar. And again, thank you, David Xu and Suching Wang, who were my technical support. Thank you, Dr. Sheila Cartata, Dr. Nithya Elkanau, Toshin Akibu, and Dr. Risa Chansky. Thank you all. Without you all, this event wouldn't have been possible, and I wouldn't have been able to envision, plan, and execute this without Dr. Farida Jalaljai, Dr. Laura Belmonte, and Dr. Rebecca Weber Hightower. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good day, evening, and good night. Bye-bye.